everyone, my name is Jenna Nelson, and today I'm going to talk to you about voter turnout in America, and specifically the low voter turnout of young people in America. To get this started, I want to go ahead and tell you just a quick personal story. The first time I participated in an Iowa caucus is a very vivid memory. It was 2016, I was a senior in high school, and I was 17 years old. Because in Iowa, if you'll be 18 by the general election, you can participate in the caucus, and that was my situation. I walked into the room with my father, and we live in a smaller precinct, so there wasn't a huge amount of people there. And I start scanning the room, just looking around at all the people there. And I'm noticing that so many people there really appear to be around the age of my father. You know, there was myself and a few of my classmates, and we're of course the youngest people there. But really, the vast majority of people appear to be 40 or above. On this night, one of the downfalls of the American political system became evident to me. Young people rarely vote and participate in the political process. For a second here, let's just widen the scope and look at the American electorate as a whole. Even without the lens of younger voters, we know voter turnout is kind of low. For whatever reasons, Americans just don't like to vote in large numbers. According to CNN, in 2016, 55.4% of eligible voters voted in the general election, and in 2012, 60% of eligible voters did. Now, just to provide some context for that statement, according to Pew Research, countries like Sweden, Denmark, South Korea, and the Netherlands all have turnout between 77 and 83%. And hold on a second, I know what maybe you're thinking, and no, voting is not the law in these countries. They get to choose to vote or not. As Thomas Jefferson said, we in America do not have a government by the majority. We have a government by the majority who participate, and we aren't well representing ourselves in that majority. There seems to be a prevalent thought process in our society that's like, so what if I don't vote? I've heard this all the time when I was out knocking doors and making phone calls for a specific campaign. People think, I'm just one voice, one vote. What I think doesn't matter. It's not going to have an effect on the political system. Which I'm not trying to speak down on people who feel this way. It's a valid way to feel. But ultimately, I think it's important to remember that in the end, it's not about one voice and one vote. It's about many voices and many votes coming together and fighting for their shared interests. That's where the power lies. When people come together and say, I'm tired of living in a world that's burning and I want my children and grandchildren to live in a world that's inhabitable, that's when we see candidates come forward and have the Green New Deal on their platform. When people come together and say, I'm tired of political dynasties and the same old career politicians. That's when we see the unlikely successes of candidates like Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump. The same goes for every other issue in the political sphere, whether it be women's rights, gun rights, taxes, trade, whatever else you can think of. When people come together and vote for their shared interests, that's when those interests become relevant in the political sphere. Because politics ultimately take the direction of those who vote. When large amounts of people come together and bring their one vote together and their voices start echoing, that's when we see those votes and voices translated onto political platforms. If we want to exist in a bottom-up political system rather than one that's top-down, we have to vote and be a part, or at least try to be a part, of the majority that Jefferson described. Now, let's narrow it back in and think of younger voters again. According to the U.S. Census, in 2016, 46.1% of 18 to 29-year-olds turned out to vote, while 70.9% of those 65 years and older did. Americans as a whole aren't voting that much, but young Americans specifically really aren't. In 2018, a group called Hawk the Vote was created to try to mend this issue in Iowa City and at the University of Iowa specifically. And one could argue that they have been quite successful on this venture. According to the Daily Iowan, from 2014 to 2018, student voting rates rose by nearly 22%, and this translates to almost 5,000 more students voting over those 4 years. I don't know about you, but to me that feels really substantial. Hawk the Vote provides students and others in the community with resources for nearly everything in regards to voting and caucusing. They are prepared to aid students in registering to vote and finding their polling places. And they collect and provide students with ample information in regards to candidates running in any given election. This past winter, they made a huge effort to help prepare students and turn them out to the Iowa caucuses. They held events where students could go and learn about everyone who was running and figure out who they most aligned with. Whether you're Republican, Democrat, anything else, you were represented. They even held a mock caucus where students could go and go through the motions of how their caucus would look in the following week. According to the executive director and founder of Hawk the Vote, Johnson County, where the University of Iowa is located, experienced a 9% uptick in caucus participation rates from 2016 to 2020, and was one of the only counties in the state to experience an increase in their turnout. Additionally, she said that most student-dominated areas had thousands of participants. My experience in the 2020 Iowa caucus was very different than the one I described in 2016. There were 800 participants in my room alone, and as I stood at the door handing out stickers to people for a certain campaign, all I could see was young people flooding and filling the room. And of course, there is a difference between caucusing in my hometown and my college town, but regardless of that, the success of Hawk the Vote was very prevalent that night. And there is no doubt that the efforts made by Hawk the Vote made caucusing a more manageable and experience for young people and something they could just understand and have a better grip on before participating in, and this made them more comfortable participating. Now, I'm sure there could be people listening to this, maybe older voters or younger non-voters or whoever, who are wondering, why does increasing youth voter turnout matter? Why should I care about it? Well, we know that young people generally do not vote in the same numbers that older generations of people do. And of course, political figures and candidates are just actively trying to gain the largest amount of votes. And if you think back to what we discussed earlier about voters setting the political agenda, it just follows logically that the platforms of these figures is going to serve the older populations because it's the reality. Those are the people who's going to turn up to vote and they want to get their votes. But where does this leave the issues that matter most for the lives of younger generations? Not particularly in the forefront. Regardless of our ages or how civically engaged we are, now more than ever, there are issues on the political table that will affect my generation and the generations that will follow. Think about the threats of climate change or accessibility to higher education, and the list goes on and on. These are things that are much more prevalent to the lives of younger people than they likely generally are to the lives of the older generations. The only way to get these issues fully integrated into the political spectrum in a way that will benefit younger people is to increase the voter turnout of young people. Even if you're an older voter and you want to vote in your best interest, which more power to you, you should vote that way, the importance of young people showing up to do the same is evident. The reality of the political system we currently exist in is younger voters need an extra nudge and some extra guidance to get themselves to the polls. And Hawk the Vote has helped prove that, well, maybe it's not perfect or a surefire solution. Education could be a good first step to bridging the gap. And I believe that Hawk the Vote has cultivated a success that can be a model for other college campuses and communities around the country. Now, to close out the talk, I pose a question to every younger person, actually every person listening. Will you be using your one vote and one voice to try to be a part of the majority in this fall during the general election? Thank you.